Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. As always, your host, Alan Bishop. Feel free to reach out to me with your questions about the art of distillation, be it professional or amateur distilling. Always glad to help you guys out with any questions that you may have. Quick old homestead update. So we actually did some bottling yesterday, which was Saturday. We knocked out our Newton Stewart, which is our corn-based sunshine. And we also knocked out one of our flavors, which is our cinnamon-based. We plan on doing a lot more of that this coming week. Getting everything that we can possibly get bottled and get that out there in the tasting room sometime in April. I don't have a date for the grand opening. It will initially be a soft opening. I mean, obviously we are a tourist attraction. The tours won't be ready yet for a little while yet because we have things to finish up in the actual distillery itself. But you will be able to stop in, try our products, have cocktails, buy bottles, all that fun stuff. As well, the almanac is on its way here, and it will go out to you guys as soon as I have it on hand, and it will go back up for physical order on thealchemistcabinet.com as soon as I have physical copies in hand. Again, I refuse to put it up for physical order from now on with any of the books that we do until we actually have those copies in hand, so you guys aren't waiting around forever on that stuff. Now, if you want a digital copy, it's over there right now, and you can pick that up. So thank you guys for supporting all that stuff. I really, really appreciate it. Also, be on the lookout. There will be a new One Piece at a Time Sacred and Profane podcast on Spotify this week with the very last two of the yeast tenders that worked at Stitzel Weller Distillery. And there's some really cool stuff in that podcast. They stopped by Old Homestead and I got to interview those guys. And it was something that I truly, truly enjoyed, learned a lot from it, and made two really good friends from it. So can't wait to share that stuff with you guys. You know, it's getting harder and harder to find people that have that old time experience, that understand that practical distilling knowledge and that practical yeast making knowledge like those guys did. And to be able to share that with you guys is really, really special. And to be able to record it for posterity so that it's a record for the world, phenomenal as far as I'm concerned. Anyways, let's get right into this stuff. So, you guys probably remember there was that Maryland, that Maryland rye question that came up here recently. And, Laura from, American Whiskey History did respond to that. She actually ended up writing quite a decent article about it, that you can find via her, social media or on Dram Devotees as well, where she really kind of gets into the history of that Maryland or Baltimore style rye that you guys were asking about. So she did give me permission, of course, here for those of you that don't follow on Facebook or don't follow her on Facebook, and you definitely should be following American Whiskey History over there because she posts so much great stuff. And she's just such a great person, a really good friend of mine. For those of you that don't follow that stuff, here is the short version of her response, because the article is pretty lengthy and not necessarily something that we need to get into in depth in the video when the information is out there and it is so well written. So she says, Alan Bishop of Old Homestead Distilling Company was kind enough to mention American Whiskey History on his One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute video the other day. He had a question about Maryland rye, specifically what Maryland rye whiskey would have looked like for distillers around Frederick, Maryland. It was a great question. This was my answer. So Maryland rye was never a monolith any more than Pennsylvania rye was. If you're looking for mash bills, my first question would be, what era of Maryland rye are you looking for? Let's assume that you want pre-prohibition Maryland rye. Mash bill implies that you're looking at Maryland distillers specifically, right? I think most of the confusion around Maryland rye comes from the fact that a lot of the Maryland rye whiskey manufactured before Prohibition was made by / in blending houses, as Alan alluded to with his comment about rectification. Liquor firms blended whiskey that they purchased in bulk and sold under their own labels. A lot of that whiskey came from Pennsylvania, too. Whiskey made in Maryland's distilleries were as different from one another as Pennsylvania ryes were from one another, and not just because a lot of it was bottled by blending houses in the cities. Frederick was en route to Baltimore for PA's distilleries in the south / central part of the state. Just like Hagerstown, a lot of PA rye moved through and was sold there. But Frederick had its own distilleries as well, like Outerbridge Horsey, Luther G. King, Levi Price, and John D. Halt distilleries. Most of the whiskey being made was in the same tradition as PA distillers. A lot of the same distillers and their family members crossed the state borders and shared a lot of the same distilling traditions. Most of the whiskey being made in Frederick was on a fire-heated pot still or a beer still, chamber still basically, with a doubler. It was definitely sweet mash rye whiskey and was often matured in steam-heated warehouses, though Outerbridge Horsey was known for sending his barrels on longboat and train trips to give himself the extra marketing angle. They would have been using rye and rye malt mostly, with some barley malt here and there. If you're looking for post-Prohibition rye like Pikesville, you're going to want to add some corn. After 1958, when the last of the great Maryland distillers passed away, standard distillers started adding corn to bring down their costs. Before 1958, the best Maryland ryes were over 90% rye with 3 to 5% rye malt and as little as 2% barley malt. That's where that huge flavor that you find in Baltimore Pure Rye, BPR, and Sherwood and all those incredible 1930s and 40s ryes came from. A lot of rye. Hope it helps. If you need more info, reach out. Cheers. Then she says, thanks again, Alan Bishop, and then links to the video, and then she links to dramdevotees.com, What is Maryland Rye, which is where you can find the longer form of her article, and she does a great job. Again, fantastic resource, very good friend of mine, love her to death. So let's see what else we got here. So this one's from Michael. So, hey, Alan, so I have some lightly Pinella capitalized, about 1/3 the sugar from Pinella, the rest from fruit, apple, pear, brandy, in the works. I have, I think it's 3 Bad Mo's that I'm considering using. A used bourbon used from Bad Mo that had a Pinella honey rum in it for a year, a bourbon barrel that was new oak that I put wheated bourbon in a year ago, a fresh light toast char 2 barrel. What are your trade-offs that I would get from each barrel, and what would be your suggestion? If it was you with these options, would love to hear your thoughts about what some are of the positives and negatives of each barrel. Oh, that's a really great question. I love seeing those Bad Mo's reused. I think that's one of the coolest things about that format is the reusability of it, and also the ability to trade used barrels with people back and forth. A couple years down the line here, as people get into some maturity with their Bad Mo's and they start dumping those bad boys, I really hope to see those things kind of hit the trade market back and forth, right? Where maybe I've got something weird that was in a barrel, and you want that barrel for something that you're doing, and you had something that I'm interested in. Let's trade back and forth, right? And keep track of it. And then that gives Christopher that much more information down the road too, over there at Bad Mo. So, for me, I would avoid the used bourbon. Although you did have, let's see. I would probably avoid both the used bourbons. Although the first bourbon used Bad Mo, that came from Bad Mo as a used barrel, had Pinella and honey rum in it. That actually might work with the apple and pear brandy. I would presume that most of the bourbon characteristic is now gone. One thing I will tell you about bourbon, and this goes for your barrel that was new oak that you had a wheated bourbon in. For me, bourbon and apple normally don't work. There's a few mash bills that might work with, but quite often what happens is there's a contrast that happens that becomes very medicinal, almost cough syrup-like with apple brandy that I'm not a fan of. In fact, I will tell you that when I was at when I was at Copper and Kings, the previous owner had forced us to fill a bunch of ex-bourbon barrels with apple brandy. As far as I'm concerned, it ruined that brandy that went into those barrels. I don't know what they ever did with it, if it ever went into a different barrel, and maybe they were able to rectify it, maybe they redistilled it or something, I don't know, but I would not really ever book on putting apple brandy in a used bourbon barrel. Now, apple brandy works extremely well in rye whiskey barrels, and so there's nothing wrong with that at all, but since you had that Pinella honey rum in it, that might be kind of cool. There might be some really cool flavors to play with there. Pinella would actually be an interesting sugar to capitalize apple brandy with, in particular, as you just said at the beginning with the product that you actually made. But now, bear in mind that if you're going to go in that barrel, you're doubling up on that Pinella sort of thing too. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I would say that since you're doing the Pinella, the apple, and the pear in particular, and the pear is a little harder flavor and aroma to hold on to, I would probably, more than likely, go into, what was it you had there, that toasted barrel, fresh light toast char number 2 barrel. Okay, it's a char 2. So if you've got a good heavy duty product to start with that has good aromatics to it, I would go to that number 2 char barrel. I've done a lot of apple brandy in number 2 char. I do almost all my bourbons, all my American whiskeys in number 2 char. I'm a proponent of number 2 char. You get a little bit more lignin content out of that, a little different flavor profile out of that, and as long as you've made a good heavy-duty brandy, it's going to hold up to it, and you might get some cool contrast with that vanilla out of there as well. Normally, that's what I'd go to, or I might even go to a toasted barrel if I really wanted to hold on to all those apple and pear aromas in particular. But I think out of the three that you have, I would avoid the bourbon barrel that was new oak that you got. And then I would decide somewhere between that Panella honey and the number 2 char is where I would probably land at on those things for long-term maturation in particular. So hope that answered your question, man. I know it was a little confusing. I apologize. But let's see, a rice flour question / opinion from James. So we've been distilling at home for nearly a decade now. Sugar washes all grain brandy along with making beer and wine. Probably 6 or 7 years ago, I started fermenting in 55-gallon barrels and realized it isn't much more work, just a bit more time to finish up. Absolutely. As time went on, I got to where I am doing 2 big runs a year, 1 grain-based and 1 wine-based. It's almost like a vacation without leaving the farm. I love the idea of that, right? That's because you don't want your hobby to become a job. And sometimes when your hobby is your job, then you don't really necessarily want to spend a whole Sunday every week doing the same thing that you do Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday, as it were. I recently ran across a chance to get a fairly large amount of rice flour at a very good price. I've done a bit of digging on the interwebs on rice-based alcohol. Nearly all lean towards sake / koji style fermentation. Where I live in Arkansas, finding some sake to try is worse than a needle in a barn full of hay. Being the rice is ground to flour with steam cooking like I do with grains, I have a steam one to attach to my boiler for grain cooking, still produce a spirit with some flavor. Depending on yeast, I run 2 kegs set up as a boiler and a thumper, so I can get away with running some murky mash. I generally make wide cuts, searching for different and good flavors, and let the final blend age a year before getting into it. Sorry for the rambling. I think steaming it is the right idea. Of course, the rice flour is going to have a slightly different flavor to it than whole rice is. So what I would have a tendency to do, I really probably wouldn't go the sake or sochu route. I would probably just take that rice flour and steam it alongside anything else I was going to use with it, and then I would just ferment it as I normally would. So a couple years ago, I think I told everybody here, and I definitely wrote it in the almanac, etc., about a recipe that was given to me by a neighbor who had known the older lady that lived over the hill that lived to be, I think, 100 plus years old. And we had an old Prohibition era recipe where she was using blue ribbon malt and she was using white rice, etc., to make beer, which we also suspect that she was turning into some shine on the side. And I recreated that shine. Didn't use the sochu or sake method in terms of koji inoculation or anything like that. I just ground up the rice and basically made a flour out of it. And then use the yeast that I would ordinarily use when I'm working, whatever it was. I don't even remember what it was there. I think in her descriptor, she used just Fleischmann's bread yeast is what she used, and it turned out beautifully. The rice came through; it was very, very nice. I didn't steam it. I literally just poured boiling water over it, and held temperature alongside whatever else was in there, the malt, and I can't remember. It seems like there was another ingredient in there, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. And just held temperature for about an hour or so. And had great fermentation come off of it. There was some sugar in there too. That's what it was. But it worked out great. I had no complaints about it whatsoever. Got plenty of rice flavor out of it, etc. My friend Chris Koning at Golden Beaver, he does a lot of rice stuff, and we've had him on Distiller's Talk where he's really gone into detail on that in the past. And so those episodes of Distiller's Talk might be worthwhile for you to look up and check out as well. So you can find that pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. I don't remember the episode number or anything like that, but he's been on a couple times, and we always enjoy having him. And I absolutely love his rice-based whiskeys, etc. He's done some bourbons that have had some rice in them too that have been just absolutely phenomenal. So that might be a good source of information to check out. But all right, guys, as always, if you have questions, reach out to me, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, YouTube comments below, and or any of my social media. And I look forward to hopefully seeing many of you at Old Homestead Distillery this coming summer. Love y'all. Later.